Hello, everybody. It's Holly from Geneva Academy. Patrick Phillips is going to tell us more about what's happening in Palestine and Gaza. So, Patrick, as you can see, the situation in Gaza now is getting worse and worse. And that's because Israel doesn't want to stop this war and doesn't want to stop bombings of civilians and innocent people only because they claim that they are fighting against Hamas while they're not. So, do you think they are fighting in the right place?
Well, I even question whether they should be fighting Hamas in the first place. Um, it's very hard to do urban warfare, and if Hamas hides within the population, and now they're talking about, Israel's talking about going in and flooding the tunnels, but I don't agree with any of what Israel's doing.
Exactly. So, in your opinion, is Israel fighting against terrorism as they claim?
Well, yeah, terrorism and the concept of terrorist, this is relative, and
Exactly.
it's very hard to not consider the Israel military as terrorists, seeing what they're doing and considering the history of Israel in the region. You know, it's interesting. There was a situation, probably now going on like 15 or 20 years ago, where a group of Israeli fighter pilots refused to fly bombing missions over Palestine. I think there are three of them, and the uproar in the Israeli press was hysterical. And there was a newspaper writer who had a column in one of Israel's main newspapers who republished the letters of Adolf Hitler, but instead of Jew, he wrote the names of these fighter pilots, and the newspaper editors said that this was a letter that he had received and that he was publishing it. They actually signed it by Hitler's real name because Hitler had changed his name, and this hate mail that was directed against the fighter pilots that wouldn't fly bombing missions over Palestine was actually reprinted in other newspapers. It was picked up in magazines until somebody said, "What the hell is going on?" and drew the publisher's attention to the fact that this was actually Hitler's letter. But it just shows how when we dehumanize the enemy, we become everything that we despise.
Exactly. And also, like for me, we can't call those people terrorists because, like, if let's say if I try to invade your house and territory, and you're just defending yourself, so should I call you a terrorist? So that's
That's
ridiculous.
The people of Palestine have no choice now except to shoot themselves out of the world's biggest concentration camp. They've tried everything else. Let's have a little context here because 2018, the Palestinians had their famous March of Return, where they marched, thousands of them, Gandhian-like, practicing nonviolence, up to the border with Israel just to demonstrate. And they were shot down, killed by the hundreds, wounded by the thousands. And so they've tried everything. In fact, why does Hamas have the clout that it does in Palestine? Because there isn't a government in Palestine. Israel has worked very hard to keep Palestine from having any kind of governing authority. And what's our theory about political violence? When you deny the political option, that's when violence springs out. And the Palestinians have had their rights trampled on.
Yeah, exactly. So, that sounds different for me as an American. So we rarely find Americans like you who really know the truth about the story of Palestine and Israel. So, how can we find Americans like you who are pro-Palestine?
Yeah, well, I'm pro-Palestine, but I'm definitely the exception. That's because of the mass media and most people stick to the narratives that they've been fed over the mass media. And as we know, the media is very biased. But there's a reason why the media is so biased in favor of Israel. And that's because the American media, and therefore the world media, is controlled by Jews. Now, they're not very religious, but they're ethnically Jewish. And so they don't let anything come to the awareness of the public that would in any way reflect negatively on Israel.
Yeah.
And so, for example, even Israeli involvement with the September 11th attacks of 2001.
Now we see these things in isolation, and the media is very biased, as you already know. So how, in favor of Israel, of course. So how do you see this situation?
Well, we do see this in isolation, and let's remember that before, after the dissolution caused by World War I, the area of Palestine ceased being part of the Ottoman Empire, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived together in harmony, and became a British protectorate. And then after World War II, Winston Churchill handed it over to the Zionists, and they took over the houses and the businesses. The Jews would come in and shoot over villages to get them all the people going away, and the old people and the disabled people that wouldn't go, they would just shoot them down. And the Jews moved into the houses of the people that lived there, just took over the houses, took over the businesses, and that's why the Palestinians have been herded into these concentration camps. I'm not against Judaism, but the kind of Jews that took over the land, they're Zionists.
Exactly.
And it's the philosophy of Zionism.
Exactly. Actually, that was the next question. So looking back on the years, in your point of view, how can you see the history of this area, like from the beginning?
Well, yes, just the fact that you had people who lived there. Now they're the grandparents of those who are in Gaza and the West Bank, and they had their land stolen from them. But I just thought of another example of what we would say media bias, and this is a good example of how the media shapes public opinion. About 10 years or so ago, the president of Iran was quoted as saying that he wanted to wipe Israel off the map. And this has been repeated over and over again to try to show that
was not even true.
Yeah, what he said was, he gave a speech and he said, until the Zionist regime occupying Jerusalem is swept from the pages of time. But there was a pro-Zionist group that was doing the translation, and they translated it as wipe Israel off the map. So this is an example of how our ideas about this have really been shaped by the hijacked narratives. But going back to the history, we have to look at the fact that the Palestinians had their land stolen from them. And Israel has only made it worse by continuing to occupy and push for more and more.
Exactly.
So, and the United Nations actually has ruled in favor of the Palestinians. No, we're not saying that now at this point after the fact that we want Israel to give up the land, but at the very least they should.
For me, that's too late actually. But finally, Patrick, so what would the solution be in your opinion?
Yeah, the solution is just what the United Nations stated many decades ago: is Israel needs to get out of Jerusalem, Gaza, and the West Bank. They need to let Palestine have a functioning state, which means that right now they have a blockade.
Elections,
military. Gaza has a seacoast, and a port, but they're not allowed to leave. They don't have the right of travel.